everyone, welcome to another What I Would Have Done Thursday, and today I thought it would be interesting to address an Uwe Boll film. Yes, this director, he's been noted for doing some very horribly made and poorly done movies, and I think this one in particular, Alone in the Dark, is no exception to that. There are a lot of problems with this film. Sort of similar problems that I guess you could say with an asylum film. It does feel very asylum-y when you watch it, because it's got full of bad acting, bad action sequences, um, a lot of nonsense that doesn't add up or make any sense, and you're sort of confused as to what's really going on. So yeah, there was a lot of stuff that needed to be done, I think, in order to improve this project, and I'm going to be trying to discuss that today, if I can, in this episode of What I Would Have Done with Alone in the Dark. So, first off, Uwe Boll decides, I don't need to try to make an introduction. I'm just going to put a slob of text and have my audience read it. And it's okay to have texts at a beginning of a film. Usually that's something that is somewhat common, but not to the extent of Uwe Boll, because he just goes on and on and on with this backstory that's supposed to sort of explain what ultimately ends up happening in the plot. And this really doesn't work because you can show more by showing in a much shorter time visually, I'd say, than anything that was within the text that continued endlessly. So I definitely would have scrapped the text and just had a visual representation with maybe some little bits of narration. And visually it would make more sense because we would get a sense of, okay, what's this ultimately leading into the story? And that, unfortunately, is kind of where the lines get blurred, but I'll sort of explain my reasoning as to what I would have done to make things a little bit more clear. So that definitely needed to be scrapped in the way beginning, and they needed to have a visual representation, because movies are visual, they're not books. This is not a Kindle. You're making a movie. So that needed to be changed. There is also a lot of nonsensical action sequences. Like I mentioned, there are points within the film where the action doesn't really make sense, because ultimately they're supposed to be these humans that somehow get these sort of quasi-superhuman powers, or as they call it, system compromises um, from these monsters that end up becoming the villains of the film. And it doesn't really make any sense, because in one action sequence we have a guy who is impenetrable by bullets, but then still a knife going, or a spike going through him destroys him. And then in another action sequence, we see that people who are possessed by these sort of monsters, or given these systems compromises, are able to are not able to survive the bullets. So there's a lot of inconsistency with how it represents what it's trying to represent. And this could, I think, have been resolved had they made it clear to the audience, okay, this is what ultimately leads some human to be indestructible, supposedly like a monster, and, want to, I guess, attack like a monster. But at the same time, maybe provide a consistent weakness. For example, maybe water, or and I know I'm bridging on um, sort of science territory here, but I think this would be a different case, because the monsters are supposedly supposed to be, I think, from like another dimension or something like that. And then they somehow broke through, but again, the movie doesn't do any clear job in explaining this. So, uh, but there needed to be some sort of consistency with um, how the universe you're trying to set up operates, and that clearly wasn't there, because we don't really know the weaknesses of the monsters. I guess by the fact, unless they get blown up, which we'll see at the end. Um, and there's no consistency sort of with the humans transforming into indestructible, superhumans who I guess are apparently zombies because they'll attack other humans or something. Like there was no explanation, and I definitely would have offered some kind of explanation. And I think being water having been their weakness, I don't think that necessarily would be a bad choice, because water is pretty plentiful on Earth, but not really around anywhere else. And the fact that these monsters are just sort of, mindless and were brought sort of to our world by us, because my explanation for changing the plot around would be um, that these military and scientists discovered this tribe, the our ancient tribe, the Upkani, which is explained in the beginning intro. And instead, I would have said um, that supposedly these scientists and military people, they know that they have some ancient technology that is super advanced, maybe something sort of similar like to Atlantis, where they were fairly intelligent and had these capabilities. And who doesn't want scientific capabilities than scientists and military people? So it makes sense that they would go, and there's supposedly these artifacts in the film that sort of make a puzzle. Um, and I think this would make sense into them thinking that somehow if you put the puzzle together, there'll be, this or they'll sort of create something that's, super advanced and super high tech, and they could go into a whole exploration of this. And see, this is where the movie um, does not explore and just turns into mindless action, because a lot of it doesn't make sense. But I would have clearly established this film as sort of like a Prometheus scenario. Like, they get into something, they don't know what it is, even though they think they know what it is, and they ultimately have consequences. And we kind of seen this formula before, but I think this formula in particular would work to the film's advantage, because again, we're dealing with something a little bit different. We're not dealing with just aliens or going and exploring other planets. We're dealing with something that's from another dimension and something that we really don't know about. So even though we think we know about it, so I think that would have been a lot more of a plausible plot scenario. Just have these military and scientists people go and find these artifacts and find this sort of ancient ruined civilization, and mess around with things, and then ultimately that results in a dimension being opened and monsters coming, and then the military and the scientists have to fight off these monsters and figure out their weakness. That would have been my plot for this film, because the plot in this movie does not make any sense. It was so hard for me to really grasp or get around what this film was doing, because there was just a lot of things that did not add up. But I think had they made it to the point where it was fairly direct and simple, it would have made things, I think, a lot more beneficial for the film. if they made it sort of an exploration, science, military mission, and not so much a paranormal guy going up against these monsters. And it just and that's what Christian Slater, the main character, is supposed to be. And then they try to tie it in with this orphanage, which makes no sense. It's so that part still confuses me. So but I think that would have just been my plot for the movie. I would say that, if you're going into like even watching a review of Alone in the Dark, you'll probably won't understand the plot. But that's kind of the plot that I would have given the movie. So, and this would have probably resulted in more consistent action sequences. This movie also jumps around too much, and I think this is where the plot gets confusing, because it jumps from like the orphanage um, to this one place that's underground where the monsters are supposed to be. It makes no sense. So I would definitely have kept it a lot more narrower and a lot more clear cut. And I think had they had this plot of the military and the scientists going in and then discovering something that ends up being beyond their control, I think that would have made a little bit more sense than having this very complicated, confusing plot where you're jumping from different things that make no sense and that don't add up. Also, there's a lot of shooting that happens in this movie, but in the dark. I guess that's why it's supposed to be called Alone in the Dark, but I mean, there's other ways to, represent that. I mean, you don't need to do it in you don't need to put in an action sequence in the dark. Um, or if you do, maybe have at least a sufficient amount of light. That would probably help. Yeah, I think that becomes an issue, and it just looks very it just looks really bad and cheesy and not as refined, and it just doesn't suit the film well. So I think I definitely would have made it a lot more I guess you could say like the Aliens films, where yeah, there's darkness, but then there's also some light going in so that we can see what's going on. Um, Also, um, I think that had the film focused on its actors and choosing actors that could probably pull off at least something, I think could have worked. I mean, I'm not saying Christian Slater was a horrible choice, but it's still at the same time, he doesn't seem to bring anything to the table. Neither does the scientist girl. So, Tara Reid, I think, so is her name. So, yeah, I think there needed to be a change of casting. There also needed to be a lot more scenes where the acting works. Instead of being really kind of just dry. Also, no monologuing. I mean, there's parts of the film where Christian Slater's monologuing, and we don't need to hear monologuing, especially in this kind of a film and setting. So, yeah, there's just all of these little things that come in that I think really do put a damper on the film. But I think largely the most significant element that this film suffered from is the plot, because the plot does not add up. There are things that make absolutely no sense. You're completely lost throughout it. It was even hard for me to really understand what was going on, but I think had they done the alternative plot, like I said, there would have probably been something better that could have come out of the story. And probably we could have had better characters and better development, and things would be a lot more clear cut and not as jumpy and confusing. So I think that's really, though, ultimately all I can say about this film. This one was a very hard one to really go through because you just don't know really where to go from because the plot is so thin and there's no way of connecting things together. So it's hard to figure out alternatives and different avenues, but I think what I suggested in this video, I think is really what the film could have done and what I would have done had I been given such a ridiculously crazy project as this one. But ultimately, I think that's really all I can say. But if there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year. And I hope to see you all in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.